Welcome to SF Nonprofit Spotlight on SF Commons, San Francisco's community access TV station. Today we have a special episode. We're joined by Jennifer Stojcovic, the Executive Director of sf.citi, who will be interviewed by the Executive Director of Bay Area Video Coalition, Paula Aragoni. Bay Area Video Coalition has run nonprofit programs, including SF Commons, in San Francisco for almost 45 years. BAVAC offers accessible training and support to media makers of all kinds to tell stories that create social change. Our guest today is sf.citi, San Francisco's tech trade association since 2012. sf.citi was developed to empower the San Francisco technology community to have a voice in local tech policy decisions and to collaborate with government leaders on solving local issues. sf.citi works on building conversations between the city's tech, nonprofit, and political communities, particularly through driving innovative policy solutions and social impact partnerships that aim to address long-standing issues facing our city. I'll hand it over to you, Paula, for the conversation.
Thank you, Lubna. It's so great to be here. Jennifer, welcome to SF Nonprofit Spotlight.
Hello, hello, and flawless pronunciation of Stojkovic. I think that's the best one I've had all year. How's it going?
It's good. Jennifer, it's 2 days after the election, and we are still in the thick of it, and I would be remiss not to point that out. So how are you doing? And, moreover, do you have any great sage advice for us in terms of what you're thinking about right now in your role at sf.citi with the election?
All right, so there are so many things to talk about when it comes to the election. I think we all have our eyes on the biggest seat right now. It looks like it's still going to be a few more days before we know anything definitively at the federal level, but certainly there was a number of really crucial things that happened at both the California level and the San Francisco level. We at sf.citi, we've been paying really, really close attention to a few of the ballot measures that we had go through in San Francisco, and really some of the things that we're laying out right now in this week's election is going to really dictate a lot of the future of San Francisco and the future of California. So yeah, I don't have any sage wisdom. I've got to say, we just really have been focused on locally how we can engage with the different nonprofits, community leaders, and government leaders to ensure that the road to recovery includes tech, because it's going to be a long, hard road, and we really want to make sure that everybody is in it together. So that's probably the main thing we're focusing on right now as an organization.
That's wonderful. No, thank you. And I know we can dig into more of that. One of the things that has been on our mind, so BAVAC is an independent media creation and artist development organization. And something I'm sure you've heard about in a lot of the policy and engagement conversations that you facilitate, a lot of San Franciscans and nonprofits and businesses have been worried about, what does the future of San Francisco look like before COVID and before all of the really important things that we've gone through in this last year happened. And so some of the themes that we've been seeing in the media that's been made is around gentrification and dislocation and, kind of the future heart and soul of San Francisco. It's so incredible to think about how those narratives now and those conversations are really changing. And, from your point of view, again, you're in the middle of these conversations. Like, what can you share with us about some of the top kind of themes that are on the table? What are those looking like?
So just to back it up a minute, Paula, do you want to talk about what things were like before COVID or what we're kind of doing as we build our way forward?
I think it's probably, I would say, before COVID, it was so top of mind. I would say, if we could focus just on what do you see going forward?
So it is, it's going to be a long, hard road to recovery, right? San Francisco had its share of issues leading to what happened in March and the pandemic being declared. One of the big problems that we had in San Francisco is we were already facing a $420 million budget deficit in January. So that was way before the pandemic hit, and we ended up in the $1.7 billion, close to $2 billion, I think, at this point, deficit. And so San Francisco, for quite some time, has been in need of some really serious policy making in terms of how we are structuring our housing. Housing shortages in the city are, I mean, we have about 70% of the entire city is zoned to single family zoning. And so that's obviously been a big issue. Transportation has been a big issue. And of course, you know, how the tax system is structured in San Francisco has also been a big issue. And so as we are looking to recover, one of the things that is really important to us is that we ensure that we have a strong tech worker base that stays in the city. Anybody who has a heartbeat, I think, at this point in the city has heard about this tech exodus, right? We have an unprecedented moment in time where there has been a large exodus of people out of the city. We don't quite know how many, but we do know that rents have dropped about 30%. To give a little context to that, in the summer of 2001, when we had the dot-com bust, our rents dropped at the absolute lowest, 30%. And we've already hit that. So we really, truly don't know how far things can go. And so it's really important to ensure that we are getting tech workers back, that we are retaining the tech companies. They estimate upwards of 90,000 on the high end of San Francisco's population falls into the tech category. So that's a lot of people. That's about 10% of the city, with so many of the major employers declaring these permanent work from home policies. We really need to make sure that we are working with the city, with the government, with the nonprofit leaders to ensure that we are creating an environment where tech can continue to grow, versus really just kind of shifting to this remote work environment where there's going to be less and less tech workers. One of the most important things for us to remember is that every tech worker in San Francisco brings an average of $650,000 of economic impact to the city.
That's an amazing figure. That's really incredible. I think that's really important, I think, for a lot of nonprofits and residents to understand. I think change is really hard. And I know, you know, for a lot of nonprofit workers and organizations, teachers, teaching artists, it's really hard to kind of grapple with what the impact is of having a strong tech community is, and what the pros and the challenges are, and how we work together to really, you know, address those. So thank you. And I think just to dig into that a little bit more, kind of wearing my nonprofit executive director hat, like, what does it mean for revenue? Like, we are so grateful for the support that we get from the city and county of San Francisco, and just how well the city has been able to navigate, like you said, these tremendous budget cuts, and we don't know how big they're going to continue to increase. And we haven't had any significant budget cuts from our city partners yet. So they're working some magic behind the scenes, but what do you see in terms of the future, and how the city is going to continue to kind of find this balance to make sure that they're able to continue to pay nonprofit service providers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first and foremost, we need tax revenue, right? And there's a few different ways that tax revenue comes into the city. And of course, tax revenue is one of the biggest drivers that is creating the funding to pay for a lot of these nonprofit grants. And one of the ones that's really concerning is that our sales tax revenue has declined by more than 50% in San Francisco. Now, to give a little bit of context about that, in most cities across California, sales tax, of course, has gone down with brick and mortar because there's less people on the streets and people are staying home. And so what you see in most places, such as LA or San Diego or Oakland, is you see as sales tax goes down, we have internet tax go up. So it kind of balances out, so that because people aren't spending on the streets with brick and mortar stores, they're spending online. San Francisco has not seen an increase in online tax revenue. And we have actually seen more than a 50% dip altogether in sales tax. So that's one of the biggest things that's concerning for us, because that means that there really truly are less people that are in the city spending, both on a delivery to your house basis or at the actual stores in the neighborhood. So that's one thing that we're keeping an eye on in terms of the economic impact of tech workers not being in the city. Some other things, of course, Office vacancies are starting to really surge. We're at about 14% right now. For a little bit of context, when the dot-com bust happened, we hit 20%. So we're probably going to see even more office vacancies as well. Offices are important to this city. In terms of the budget, when you create more offices, we generate an affordable housing linkage fee. So what actually happens is when offices are developed in the city, it generates hundreds of millions of dollars that goes towards affordable housing. So when tech grows in the city, so does the budget and the different areas that funds some of these vital nonprofits and the work that folks like, well, all of us do, right? So there's a lot of different key things that we're looking at in terms of revenue that have really dipped down, and we have to figure out how to get that revenue back up.
That's so interesting to hear, because I think, some of the complexities that we face as nonprofits, like right now, we're really struggling at our organization. We have a large facility that we've had for more than 20 years. And we've been, probably luckier than many. We've been able to stay current with our rent and so forth, but we're not seeing any ability to dialogue with, our building owner in terms of kind of sharing the brunt of us not being able to use our facility. And so I think just having this nuanced approach from the business perspective and the nonprofit sector about how we can kind of collectively, be able to kind of bear the brunt of what we're facing, I think is really important, because I don't think government is going to be able to solve all of these issues. Like, no. the building owner still has to pay their mortgage to the bank. So it's a huge issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the same position as SF.citi. We've been upheaved from our office as well. And as a small nonprofit, when the funds start to dry up and push comes to shove, a lot of people are ending up displaced, or they're in these positions where they're not able to pay their rent. So I don't think that any of us are immune to that, for sure.
Yeah. Just pivoting a little bit, one thing that I know that SF.citi does a lot is really think about social impact and the role that you can play in supporting corporate social responsibility, and kind of doing that compare and contrast again of like pre-COVID and now, like, what are you seeing in terms of some of the real trends in how CSR is changing? And I guess the second part of that is like, how can more nonprofits really, form partnerships with companies that are successful for both sides?
Yeah, so we obviously, as the main tech liaison for the city, we do a ton of social impact work, and we work very, very closely with tons of nonprofits as well as SFUSC in terms of connecting tech partners. When the pandemic hit, it was very, very difficult for us to figure out how can we keep all of these tech partners engaged. And one of the things that's been very interesting for us is that virtual volunteerism, if you can believe it, has really, really, really taken off. And that is for anybody that is listening and has a nonprofit and you traditionally did volunteerism with different corporate partners in an in-person setting, whether it be one-on-one mentoring, or perhaps they were coming and helping volunteer, at the food bank or things like that. We have seen some really successful stories where tech companies transitioned their volunteering efforts with their employees and went online. And it's really, really working. And the employees are very, very happy with what they've been able to do. So there's a few different things we've seen. Obviously, there's ways where, for instance, if you were mentoring kids, right? If you were mentoring kids in the school system, they simply took it to one-on-one Zoom mentoring, right? And there's also some interesting things where there's asynchronous volunteerism and synchronous volunteerism. So if you have someone that you are helping apply to college, for instance, you can do a one-on-one Zoom call with them, or they could email your college application, right? The student could send it over to one of the employees, and then they checked it on their time and sent back a video message. So one thing to keep in mind if you are a nonprofit is that you can offer both synchronized and asynchronous volunteerism. The other thing that I want to make a note is that our members estimate that about 90% of all volunteerism that they are going to facilitate with their tech employees next year will be online.
Wow. Well, those are So many good tips. And it's funny because I think the words synchronous and asynchronous, like I'm sure in terms of like popularity of words this year, they're like right up there.
Right?
Yeah, those are so many amazing tips. And I think that we are just about out of time, but is there anything else that you want to kind of shout out about SF.citi's work right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to keep in touch with everything that's going on, connecting both the tech community, the nonprofit community, the city, please go to sf.citi.org and you can sign up for our newsletter. You can also get our Monday community update that we do. So every Monday morning coming to your inbox is a full digest on everything going on, COVID related, community related, and all the resources you as a nonprofit can use with the tech companies. There's new things coming out every single week. So please, if you are interested, you can sign up on our website. We also are looking to launch an end of year holiday gives opportunity. We do this every single year. Typically it's in person, but if you are watching from one of the tech companies that we work with, we're super excited to be doing virtual volunteerism at the end of the year. Much more to come on that.
Fantastic. Well, wonderful. Jennifer, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you and to learn more about SF.citi. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Jennifer Beach and Noelle Hanrahan started Prison Radio 30 years ago. Beach became intrigued with audio stories about life behind bars when her partner worked on a KPFA series about women in prison. Today, inmates record short commentaries that Prison Radio distributes on the web and on 300 radio stations. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for inviting me here.
It's great to have you here. You know, San Francisco isn't too far away from a state prison. It's about 18 miles from San Quentin, and we have lots of radio stations here. But can you tell me how Prison Radio got started in San Francisco?
Well, San Francisco has a rich activist history, and I would say both Noelle and I came out of a feminist, activist, anti-racist community. And so our interest, you know, we knew people who had been part of a wide range of movements for social change, and that introduced us to political prisoners in the United States, who introduced us to early on to the reality of an apartheid system, really, where you have this large number of people in prison. And we realized that those voices were really silenced in public debate. And that seemed like something that we could maybe chip away at. So for us, Prison Radio was a way to tear down the prison walls and to de-isolate the voices.
So you're based in the Mission District, and just to a basic question about how Prison Radio works, how do you collect the voices of people imprisoned in California, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, other places? You get voices from all over America. How do they participate as correspondents?
Well, in the old days, when we started, we had to go to a prison and get permission and bring our equipment, and it's very cumbersome and difficult. But now technology has changed so much that now people can call us and we can record their phone calls. So that's really opened the doors to hearing from a much wider geographic range of experiences. So people in prison call us and we record their commentaries. It's pretty simple. On that level, you know, we have to have special equipment and we have a sound engineer on staff because there's a lot of background noise. If you know anything about sound production, there are still technical issues to resolve, but that's something we really kind of have gotten down pat now. So that part is much easier than it used to be, for sure.
And I myself have realized there seems to be a rise in first-person content from incarcerated people. I think about San Quentin's Ear Hustle. It's a wonderful success. It's made with the approval of its warden, and it continues even though its main co-host Earlonne Woods was released. But Prison Radio and your approach is different. Can you tell me how?
Well, first I want to say I love Ear Hustle. I think it's great. And I think it's a very high quality programming, which is very difficult to get inside prison. There's a lot of technical obstacles. And Ear Hustle, I want to give all props to Ear Hustle. And you have to be a certain category of prisoner to participate in programs like Ear Hustle, right? First of all, most prisons, even in California, San Quentin has very dynamic programs because they are a part of this community of people outside who want to support people in prison. But in order to participate in Ear Hustle, you have to be a certain category of prisoner, right? And like, for instance, in San Quentin, the East Block is people who were condemned to death. That's 700 people. They would never be allowed to participate in Ear Hustle, right? But we have 3 correspondents who call us from death row in San Quentin, right? So, but also the messaging of Ear Hustle is not going to go too far astray from whatever the messaging San Quentin would like to have, whether that's about personal responsibility or rehabilitation or certain, or even the power of the programs of San Quentin, right? To kind of market or to depict a more positive set of possibilities. So if you say filed a grievance against San Quentin, you're probably never, ever going to be allowed to be on Ear Hustle, right? So, but we are not through the prison. We don't come through the prison. We don't have to, we don't care what your status is with the prison. If you call us and read your commentary, we will share it because that's what we want. We really feel like people living inside of prisons are the leadership of the movement for social and racial justice. And so our goal is to amplify those voices. So the question of censorship, whether that's self-censorship or, just kind of an assumption of the power dynamic, is very different for any in-prison program and what we do.
Jennifer, so what I'm hearing is these are unsanctioned messages that the correspondents are able to get out through prison radio, and listening to some of the content from an Indiana inmate reporting about COVID-19 and a lockdown happening there without testing and tracing, and what he calls an effort for herd immunity. Another inmate in Kansas describes a firsthand experience with being testing positive for COVID-19. Obviously, this virus has hit some communities harder than others. And I'm wondering if you, the inmates that you are featuring who are sharing their experiences, that are talking about suffering inside, if they are subject to backlash, perhaps, for sharing unsanctioned, unapproved.
Sure, for sure. I mean, I think right now our number is blocked from the federal prison system. And we only know that because someone inside told us that. We have so then now we have to go through a whole thing where we go to the, we have to go to the Federal Department of Corrections and try to resolve that. So, so that kind of thing happens occasionally. For sure, people have called us and they've written us and said, I can't call you because since the last time I called you, all my phone privileges were removed. And so now they can't call anybody. Or in Pennsylvania, even, this is a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, the state of Pennsylvania tried to pass, they did pass a law, although it was later ruled unconstitutional, that prohibited people inside from talking to any radio journalists. And that was believed by the people inside, that was understood to be about our work with Mumia Abu-Jamal. So, so definitely people have felt the repression, and they know that when they call that they're taking a risk, right? So I think if there's anybody who understands the vulnerabilities and the power dynamics and the punishment capacity of the prison, it's the people who are living inside of it. But for most of them, they feel that for most of the people that call, this is their one opportunity to kind of say their truth. Now, we don't get a lot of people talking a lot about their cases. I mean, sometimes we get that, but there's more likely to be commentary about prison conditions or the prison phenomenon. So it's not really always so personal. But people have said to me over and over again, this is my only chance to tell about my experiences. And so I think in that sense, it's something that our correspondents, we consider them our journalists, it's a risk that they're willing to take because it's such an important opportunity for them.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Mumia Abu-Jamal, and as a child growing up in Texas, I remember hearing radio dispatches picked up by some of the college stations, and I would love to hear how you began this relationship. You know, he's basically considered your star correspondent at this point. And maybe you can talk about how this former death row inmate in Pennsylvania began recording and distributing his radio dispatches.
Well, Mumia Abu-Jamal was a radio journalist before he went into prison. So, and he was writing commentaries for a decade before we kind of built a relationship with him. But those were not recorded. They were mailed out to different supporters. So in the early 90s, Noel went into Dublin Federal Correctional Institute and interviewed some women that we knew in the Dublin prison. And some of those people were political prisoners. And they told us, they said, you should go and record Mumia Abu-Jamal. At that time, he was the only political prisoner on death row in the United States. And he subsequently has had his death penalty overturned. So now he's doing life without the possibility of parole. And so he's a very important voice. He's a former Black Panther. He's part of a generation of Black Panthers that were incarcerated under COINTELPRO. And so he's a survivor of political and also a sufferer of political repression. And your next project should be to go and record him. So then we did that. So from our very early days, we were following the leadership, the political and kind of informational leadership of people in prison. So there was people inside prison who told us, you have to record Mumia. And then we went there for the first time, I think in '92. And in those days, you had to get permission from the prison and you had to bring your equipment in and you had to, so we had to fly to Pennsylvania and we had to rent a car and we didn't have any money and we went into debt and we recorded him. And then we did not understand, we did not fully adequately anticipate the high quality of his production. So that was a very exciting moment when he started speaking and we realized we had to stop our whole program and just figure out a way to record him in an ongoing way. So if you heard Mumia in your college radio station in Texas, that's because we recorded him. So we have been the primary avenue for his spoken word to get out into the public. And even if you, today, if you might hear an interview with him on Medium or something, it was probably arranged through us, right? So that for a long time, that was our primary work, was finding a way to, and it was very hard in those early years for technical reasons. We'd had to go there and record tapes and then come home and go to a studio and edit them and then make copies and distribute the tapes. It was very cumbersome in those days. But that was, I think, really critical, I think, because his leadership has been, I consider Mumia to be one of the primary intellectuals of the American left. And I am grateful to have played a role in sharing that leadership with the public.
Powerful words. Jennifer Beach, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for inviting me. It was lovely to talk to you.
It's great hearing from you.